In most stories, the hero is usually an adventurer, someone remembered for heroic feats while wielding their weapons. In a way, it's their story that sets everything in motion, as if they were the foundation of great journeys. But almost no one talks about the weapons themselves, or about the ones who create them. And that's exactly where this story shifts its focus. Because the true protagonist here is someone who lives hidden behind the hero's brilliance, someone whose soul was shaped by iron and fire. This is the story of a blacksmith. Because of the war, the village of Volcania, known for its blacksmiths, was also struck. The place was in flames, practically destroyed, as it was being attacked by the 8th commander of the Demon Legion. He watched everything, and asked his soldiers why the village hadn't been conquered yet, and the messenger replied that everything was going according to plan, that they would soon take control of the place. The gates were already on the verge of collapse, and the few survivors could feel the structures trembling. Among them, some commented that, according to the Empire's information, they were alone there, since the high-ranking officers had left long ago. Others simply confirmed the obvious, saying they had expected this. After all, they had been abandoned by their own nation. Even so, a message from the demon army was delivered. If they began forging weapons for the demons, they would be spared, but if they refused, they would all die. Still, no one there seemed willing to surrender. They were already prepared to die for it. At that moment, a little girl approached her father, and he, trying to remain calm, told Yuta to hide and not make a sound. He explained that the forging techniques passed down through generations were the essence of Volcania, the true heart of that place, and that this tradition could never be broken. That's why she needed to survive. He went on to say that she had to move forward without regrets, that she needed to be proud, because without blacksmiths there are no heroes. In a world full of monsters, they are the ones who create humanity's weapons. Even in the face of despair and harsh reality, Yuta had to live on to carry this legacy and pass on the village's skills. When the gates were finally destroyed, the blacksmiths were already waiting for the demons. The commander observed the scene and questioned whether they had chosen death, and Yuta's father replied that blacksmiths may be broken, but they are never malleable like metal, and therefore would never bend. With that, the commander ordered them all to be killed, and the blacksmiths fought with everything they had, using hammers, blades, and the very power of the furnaces. Amid the chaos, Yuta tried to run to save her father, but his final words were for her never to forget that they were blacksmiths. Soon after, he was killed before her eyes. In time, everyone was exterminated, leaving only Yuta, the last survivor of Volcania. The commander then approached her, saying it was a pity that all the shields protecting her had been destroyed. He grabbed her brutally and said she should be grateful to be alive, because now she carried the blacksmith's blood and would serve the Demon King. Years later, now within the Demon King's domain, inside Rodiel's forge, Yuta, now older, worked tirelessly. 10 years had passed since the massacre of her village, and she survived as an enslaved blacksmith, creating weapons and equipment for the demons. In the midst of her routine, she set aside her work goggles and thought that nothing ever really changed, that this couldn't even be called work. At that moment, the commander appeared carrying a report, and the body of a subordinate named PX, who had died in battle. He asked whether it could still be used, and Yuta understood exactly what he meant, since the materials she worked with were not just ordinary metals, but monster corpses. The commander ordered the body to be dismantled and turned into a weapon, and that was precisely what she did every day, dissecting bodies, discarding what was useless, and reusing the rest. It was a miserable, painful, and disgusting process, but necessary to survive. Deep down, she thought that maybe she should have died alongside her family and her village, because she had lost the true purpose of a blacksmith, the very thing her father tried to teach her until the end. Even so, she kept going, with no choice, until, suddenly, something unexpected happened. Someone literally fell through the ceiling into the forge. It was a blonde woman who asked if there was a human there. Confused, Yuta asked who she was, and the woman introduced herself as the heroine. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a messenger informed the commander that other leaders were questioning the fact that a human was crafting weapons from the bodies of demons themselves. The commander dismissed the criticism, saying they were all fools, since Yuta's ability came from her lineage, something unique that no one else could replicate. He explained that working with monster bodies was extremely dangerous, as they could explode or disintegrate, but she possessed a kind of gift, almost like magic, that allowed her to turn them into powerful artifacts. That was why she was kept alive. Back in the forge, Yuta began to take an interest in the heroine, especially in the swords she carried, asking about their material, how they were made, and where they came from. The heroine answered simply, saying she got them from the so-called blacksmith street, that they weren't very expensive, and only had a few enchantments. Even so, Yuta was fascinated, analyzing the balance and quality of the blades, even acting a bit strange as she examined them closely. The heroine found it curious, but Yuta explained that there was no way she could be normal after being captured as a child and forced to work for monsters. The conversation continued, and the heroine asked if she had learned all of that on her own, and Yuta explained that she had studied from documents left behind by her people, since the commander threatened to kill her if she didn't produce results. Even amid all this, Yuta showed admiration for the so-called blacksmith's street, saying that the place must be incredible. The heroine then suggested taking her there, since forging weapons was clearly more than just survival for her. According to the heroine, people who keep living even in the worst conditions usually have a reason, or are searching for one, and she wanted to know what Yuta's reason was. This made Yuta remember her father's words and everything about the village, about continuing on even even in the face of pain and misery, carrying Vulcania's legacy. The heroine then said that she didn't need to explain her reason, but she needed to feel it for herself. At that moment, everything began to shake again. As a new visitor arrived, the commander of the 8th Legion, he recognized the heroine and commented that he had heard about her wandering through the Demon King's territory, and that it was quite curious she had ended up there. Without wasting time, the heroine said they would continue their conversation later, calling Yuta Miss Blacksmith as she drew her swords and prepared to fight. Without hesitation, she charged at the commander, starting the battle, remarking that it had been a while since she had destroyed the rest of his legion. He replied that it was all her fault, that because of her, he ended up stuck in that miserable place, overseeing that forge. Even so, during the fight, the demon used a strange attack the heroine had never seen before, a tail that spun like a saw. Still, she dodged it with ease, making it clear that if the attack didn't land, it didn't matter at all. Watching this, Yuta realized how free that woman was, fighting as if she were flying, and compared it to her own situation, realizing just how trapped and miserable she truly was. The demon complained that the new tail was useless and lunged forward with a punch, but once again the heroine dodged, replying that the problem wasn't the weapons, but him. The two then clashed directly, using their most powerful techniques, her with the northern sword style, and him with demonic blazing fury. At that moment, Yuta began to notice that the heroine was being pressured, but as if reading her thoughts, the heroine herself responded, saying that if someone stands still forever, only defending, they will never move forward. Nothing changes that way. One must break the current reality and take a step toward the future. Right after that, she launched silver darts into the demon's chest, and the lightning that burst from them completely paralyzed his body, making him collapse. The heroine taunted him, asking if he was having trouble moving, explaining that a swordsman who relies only on their blade ends up full of openings. Even so, the commander reminded her that this was still his territory, and several demonic subordinates appeared to attack. Unbothered, the heroine said everything was under control because her beloved disciple should already be dealing with them. At that moment, Ash appeared holding the head of one of the demons, sarcastically complaining that the dirty work always fell to her. Meanwhile, the commander remained on the ground, unable to move due to paralysis, and began shouting at Yuta, demanding that his slave do something. Before she could react, the heroine called out to her, saying that if she didn't change now, she would remain trapped there forever, and asked what her reason for continuing to live was. That made Yuta remember everything: her father, the village, and the fact that she was the last survivor of Vulcania, the one who had to carry and pass on the blacksmith's legacy. Driven by that, she finally took action, breaking the chains that bound her. This was the first step toward changing her reality. The commander, desperate, asked what she was doing, if she wanted to die, still calling her a slave, but Yuta refused to accept that. She remembered her father's words and affirmed her identity, declaring that she was not a slave, but a blacksmith, Yuta Garancia. With that, her next strike crushed the demon. Afterward, still somewhat in disbelief, she asked the heroine if that was really possible, and the answer came with confidence. The heroine said she had never doubted her abilities. She explained that by finding companions and unleashing her full potential, Yuta could become a legend and achieve what she truly desired. That was her master's teaching. No one is stronger than someone who values their own abilities. Then, the heroine made a direct invitation, asking if they could go together to Blacksmith Street. That deeply moved Yuta, who remembered her father's promise to take her there, the place where the greatest blacksmiths in the world gathered. Emotional, she accepted, saying she truly wanted to go, that she no longer wanted a life bound by chains, forging under oppression, but a life where she could create what she desired. The heroine then told her to follow, calling her by her full name, Yuta Garancia. The story then moves forward, set before the moment when the skeleton herald would descend from the mountains to begin a great war, in a time when many ambitions converged on Blacksmith Street. Even surrounded by monsters, the girls didn't seem afraid at all. The taller one commented that there were plenty of test subjects, while the other asked what Yuta intended to do. Without hesitation, she unleashed all her power, wielding a trident capable of creating massive waves, while her companion complained that she wanted extra pay for that. At the same time, she plunged her lightning sword into the ground, creating a vortex that pulled in even the largest creatures, mixing water and electricity in a devastating way. All the monsters tried to attack at once, but ended up being dragged in and destroyed without any chance. After the battle, Yuta commented that she had expected more difficulty, even feeling slightly disappointed that everything had been resolved with a single strike. Her companion, however, complained that the sword made by Yuta had broken, which made her feel a slight pang in her chest. Even so, the other girl said it wasn't her fault, and Yuta quickly recovered, stating that it was fine, since she had obtained new materials and still had several weapons available. She then suggested they return to the shop. Later, back at the forge, Yuta worked with focus, shaping a curved blade under intense heat, until she finished it, and concluded that it was good enough. Meanwhile, her companion tried to take a nap, but the constant sound of the hammer didn't help much. Suddenly, Yuta had the feeling that someone had returned. Sometime later, a hero arrived in the city accompanied by his party, being introduced to the famous Blacksmith Street, a place known for gathering the most skilled craftsmen on the continent. Everything there was of the highest quality, filled with rare weapons and unique equipment, practically a sacred place for adventurers. The hero commented that the place seemed incredible, but that the atmosphere was a bit different from what he had heard. The group scout explained that the forge he was looking for was called Ralph Love. When they arrived, there was no one there to assist them, so they began looking at the items on display. The mage then asked about the rumors he had mentioned, and the hero said he had heard that master blacksmiths were extremely powerful and rough, but that didn't seem to be the case there. The scout explained that everyone followed strict rules, and breaking them could result in severe punishment, even the loss of one's arms. The hero thought that sounded exaggerated, almost like a bluff, but soon the owner of the forge, Baron Brook, appeared and made it clear it was no joke. He explained that those rules existed to keep everyone under control, and asked what the group wanted. The hero then mentioned a so-called monstrous weapon, something he had heard about. Baron Brook immediately denied it, saying they didn't deal with that kind of thing, since creating weapons from monster parts was an absolute taboo on that street. Even so, the hero insisted, revealing that he already knew everything, and mentioning a weapon marked with a horn and a hammer. At that moment, his eyes turned red and a strange energy began to surround his body, drawing the mage's attention. She noticed he had been acting increasingly strange ever since he found that weapon. She tried to stop him, saying it wasn't worth forcing the blacksmiths to break their taboos. For a moment, he seemed to agree, saying it was better not to waste time there. But suddenly, he attacked without warning and beheaded the mage, stating that 2 sacrifices would be enough. Then he killed the scout as well, making it clear he would keep killing until someone revealed the location of the monstrous weapon. Finally, he revealed his own weapon, which seemed to be taking control of his body. As he unleashed its power, something sinister emerged, and several monstrous creatures began invading the place, destroying everything around them. A massive explosion engulfed Blacksmith Street, while the creatures advanced to devour and kill everyone, even wounded beneath the rubble. Baron Brook still insisted that no one there would break the taboo, that they would rather die than do so. He also warned that it was a weapon humans should never use, and asked whether the hero couldn't see how his mind had been corrupted since he found it. The hero, however, completely ignored him, saying it didn't matter, as he recalled the moment he found that weapon, when a corpse appeared drifting before him. He then declared that he needed it to achieve his goal, that he needed the power of that weapon, making it clear he didn't care whether it was a monstrous weapon or not, because in the end what truly mattered was the power needed to become a true hero. With that, he attempted to kill Baron Brook right there, but before the blow could land, Ash suddenly appeared and blocked the attack with ease. At that moment, Yuta also appeared, commenting that it had been a while since she had seen someone like him, treating the situation with a calm, almost provocative tone, as she asked how he had been. The hero wasted no time, and launched a counterattack, but Yuta easily dodged, saying it was quite rude to try to kill someone on a first meeting. She added that she had already warned Baron Brook not to deal with strange customers like him, while asking Ash to take care of the old blacksmith. Even so, Baron Brook still tried to warn her, reminding her of the taboo of Blacksmith Street, saying those weapons should never be used. But Yuta no longer accepted that. She replied that those rules had served no purpose, that all of it had only led them to this miserable situation. Enraged, she released the core of her hammer and struck the ground, creating a blazing explosion that opened a massive crater and set everything around on fire. The hero then realized that beneath them there was a draconic lava vein, and soon several monstrous weapons began to appear around Yuta. In a provocative tone, she asked if that was what he was looking for, inviting him to admire her works of art. The hero then understood that the weapons had been with her all along, and Yuta confirmed it, saying he was right, but that they were not so easy to obtain. Without giving him time to react, she struck a sword in mid-air with her hammer, tearing off the hero's arm. She continued attacking relentlessly, driving multiple blades through his body until he was completely shattered and covered in blood. Even so, he still tried to assert himself, declaring that he was the hero, and once again unleashed the power of Era Satan, causing several monstrous mouths to appear and devour everything around them. Yuta, however, realized that he had barely unlocked the weapon's true potential, and said she would show him the proper way to use it. She then drew her longsword and used her own blood to activate its power, unleashing the force of Hades. A necrotic rift opened, from which several zombified hands emerged, grabbing and destroying the mouths of Era Satan, completely turning the tide. The hero could hardly believe what was happening, and soon he too was pulled into that rift, dragged by what seemed like a river of the dead. Yuta explained that he had managed to activate the weapon with human blood, but that proper use required the wielder's own blood, and the more he sacrificed, the more power he would gain. Even so, she made it clear that wielding a power like Hades at that level was not something an ordinary human could achieve. Emerging from the smoke, she approached the hero, now completely destroyed, saying she didn't know how he had managed to get his hands on Eraseton, but that in the end, it only made her job easier. She also explained that the weapon consumed the user's mind, but by forming a contract with it, it was possible to control that power, something the blacksmiths of the street ignored because they considered it taboo. When the hero asked who she really was, Yuta answered simply that she was just a blacksmith, but that there was something that made her different from the others. At that moment, the other blacksmiths of Blacksmith Street were also fighting against the remaining creatures of Eraseton, proving that they were not as weak as they seemed. In the end, they all managed to defeat the creatures, showing that the place was filled with unique talents. With everything settled, Yuta sarcastically introduced the false hero to the true blacksmith's street, making it clear that he was nothing more than an idiot. However, not long after, the situation changed completely, and she ended up being expelled from the place. Furious, she complained to Ash that she had saved the street and was still banished, while Ash replied that deep down it was partly their fault as well. Yuta had always been known as an extraordinary blacksmith, but her difficult personality didn't help at all. She questioned the reason behind it, refusing to accept the decision, while it became clear that creating monstrous weapons was an absolute taboo there. Perhaps the older masters feared or even envied her skill, but it was no secret that greed in Blacksmith's Street could corrupt anyone. Even so, Yuta had already expected something like this to happen one day, and she began to think about revenge. When Ash asked what they would do now, since they wouldn't be allowed back and all the monstrous weapons had supposedly been confiscated and destroyed, Yuta replied without hesitation that she had a plan to completely destroy Blacksmith Street. As Ash tried to stop her from that reckless idea, Yuta's hammer activated on its own, revealing an eye within it that emitted a beam of light pointing to a specific location. Yuta recalled that the eye came from a monster with tracking abilities and that she had used it to locate nearby monstrous weapons. When she realized the beam was pointing toward Blacksmith Street itself, she understood that not all of them had been destroyed. Outraged, she said that someone was hiding one of her weapons and questioned Ash, who ended up admitting that she had indeed kept one. Without wasting time, Ash drew a flaming katana and asked what the plan was, and Yuta answered directly that there was no need to explain. They were going to destroy everything. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, the old blacksmith Colt Karan, a former master of Blacksmith Street, reflected on how he had once been considered one of the best, but was now being surpassed even by ordinary adventurers. His skills had become outdated, and his reputation only worsened over time. However, everything changed the day he witnessed the power of monstrous weapons and what Yuta was capable of. After seeing that, he realized that if he could obtain one of those weapons, he could reclaim his former glory. During the trial of Yuta Garencia, which resulted in her permanent banishment, Colt Karan put his plan into motion and secretly acquired one of the monstrous weapons. Admiring the spear, he believed he would finally return to the top. Later, Yuta and Ash infiltrated Blacksmith Street through a secret tunnel Yuta had created in the past to test her weapons. Following the trail indicated by the hammer, they approached the location where one of her creations was being kept. Using binoculars, Ash observed that there was a large operation underway to deal with the weapons, and Yuta quickly realized that only someone influential could organize something on that scale. When she identified the person responsible, she saw that it was Colt Karan, who at that moment was trying to dismantle the spear to understand its composition and replicate it. Yuta concluded that it was a desperate move from someone whose forge was in decline. When Ash asked what the next step would be, Yuta made it clear she had no intention of acting cautiously. She would simply crush everything. Meanwhile, Colt Karan believed he was one step away from uncovering the secret of monstrous weapons and producing them on a large scale. But suddenly everything around him began to shake, signaling that something was about to happen. One of the workers warned that Yuta was invading the laboratory at that very moment, and indeed she was already inside, smashing everyone with her hammer without mercy while searching for the bald boss of the place. One of the blacksmiths tried to react, charging at her with a sword and calling her a banished traitor, but was easily knocked down with just one of her hands, showing he stood no chance. Then Colt Karan appeared, saying it had been a long time since he had seen Yuta's face. He commented that he had no idea how she found that place, but that he personally wanted to thank her, since thanks to the monstrous weapons she created, he had managed to become the greatest blacksmith on the street once again. Even so, he made it clear that, for the sake of humanity, that technology should remain with him alone, and that she would have to die there. In addition to the blacksmiths, he had also hired underworld mercenaries to ensure that outcome. Yuta responded sarcastically, saying the old man had really gone to great lengths for his plans. Even with his apology, she realized she had no choice when the assassins rushed toward her, so she decided to use her power. Activating her technique, she made her sword unleash 1,000 arms, creating flaming limbs that attacked simultaneously and struck the first enemy with great force. As she fought, she taunted them, saying she had no blind spots and could defend herself from all directions. Even when one of the assassins tried to attack while she was speaking, the strike had no effect, as she blocked it easily and even complained about their lack of manners for attacking in the middle of her explanation. She realized it was a dirty fight, with everyone coming at her at once without caring about life or death, so she decided to endure for the moment. Even so, she noticed they were focusing too much on her. At that moment, Ash managed to break through the mercenaries, and Yuta threw her katana toward her. Ash charged straight at Colt Karan, but her attack was intercepted by the mercenaries. Only when she activated the 1,000 flaming arms was she able to truly react, unleashing a blazing strike that cut through the monstrous spear. Colt Karan was shocked, realizing that he himself wasn't the target, but the weapon was. When Ash stepped back, he asked what had changed with that attack, and Yuta explained that it wasn't just monster bodies that made a monstrous weapon. That spear had a blood contract with its original owner, and once it was destroyed, the bond was broken as well. She made it clear that he would never be capable of forging something like that, calling him a bald thief and an idiot, and explained that creating such weapons involved forming bonds with beings beyond the human world, something that couldn't simply be stolen. Suddenly, a massive portal opens above them, and a gigantic gigantic dragon appears. The creature, called Beliars, comments that the magical power of the tooth Yuta had treated has reconnected, and the pain has returned to the point of nearly driving him insane. Yuta asks if he's okay, and explains that the magical seal was undone because of Colt Karan. Upon hearing this, the dragon understands the situation and agrees to help, deciding to erase all the humans there from existence. Meanwhile, in the Artisans District, nobles and elders discuss the situation. One of them comments that Yuta was a waste of talent, and that if she hadn't broken the rules, she could have been accepted back. He reveals that he brought her in because of her exceptional skill and assigned Baron Brook to watch over her. But even so, everything spiraled out of control. Baron Brook apologizes, but says that the more someone is suppressed, the sooner or later they will explode. Another noble disagrees, claiming that people can be controlled through rules and authority. At that moment, a massive explosion interrupts everything, and a messenger announces that Yuta and Ash have arrived. Back in the laboratory, Beliars is already destroying everything, wiping out blacksmiths and mercenaries as the cave ceiling collapses. The level of destruction is absurd, impossible to confront. Colt Karan faces the consequences of his own plan. He is nearly crushed by a rock, only his leg being hit, and realizes that everything that seemed simple has gone completely wrong. Yuta approaches him and questions whether he really thought he could copy her work just by stealing. She explains that monstrous weapons demand a high price, often one's own life, something he would never understand because he only thinks about money. Since ancient times, heroes, demon kings, and adventurers have risked everything to obtain this kind of power. She makes it clear that these weapons are not meant for absolute good, but to be powerful, wielded by strong individuals, and declares herself a true monstrous blacksmith. Colt Karen replies that she speaks well, but one day she will realize that the two of them are not so different. Yuta immediately rejects the idea, calls Beliars, climbs onto his neck, and decides to show the truth. She states that she does not want to be compared to someone like him, and orders the dragon to destroy everything he built, leaving only a few chests containing weapons. During the destruction, Yuta warns not to destroy the chests, as doing so could trigger a chain reaction with the magic. Even so, Beliars accidentally crushes some of them, setting off a massive explosion. The monstrous weapons are blasted away, scattering across the entire world, each landing in a different place. Seeing this, Ash realizes the situation has become even worse, while Yuta complains about the dragon, calling him an idiot. Later, exhausted after so much walking, Yuta continues searching for a specific place. Ash questions whether that really is the right location, since they've been walking for so long without finding anything. Yuta replies that Elson's gaze is guiding them, and even the hammer itself confirms it. Even so, Ash still doubts it, pointing out that the place looks like a front line against the remnants of the Demon King. Yuta, on the other hand, looks at the landscape and comments that it brings a nostalgic feeling. Ash asks why, out of all possible places, they had to end up there. Yuta admits that everything turned into a huge mess, especially after what happened with Beliars, since that mistake caused the monstrous weapons to scatter across the entire continent. Even so, she acknowledges that most of the blame fell on the Artisans' Council, which changed several rules and taboos of the Blacksmith Street and ended up granting her exclusive rights to produce and distribute this type of weapon. Meanwhile, Colt Karen was judged, and Yuta received the responsibility of traveling across the continent to recover all the weapons, which explains why they ended up there. She fully trusts Elson's gaze, since it never fails, and is certain that whoever holds the weapon is in that place. And indeed, a mage was using a monstrous staff on the battlefield, taking advantage of the weapon's overwhelming power while saying it was practically a blessing, as she felt far more powerful. She was effortlessly wiping out several humans. Meanwhile, Ash complains about being tired from so much walking, but soon notices something strange on the field. There was a novice mage wearing armor, casting weak spells that didn't even scratch a giant cyclops. It caught her attention because it made no sense for a mage to fight like that. The man keeps trying, casting several useless lightning spells, until he gives up, throws away his wand, and runs off. Seeing this, Ash gets excited at the chance for action, while Yuta already thinks that monster would make a great weapon. The two charge in at the same time, one with a sword and the other with a hammer, and defeat the cyclops in seconds. After that, Yuta approaches the strange mage and asks why someone in armor is using only basic magic on the front lines against demons. The man thanks them for saving him and introduces himself as Banzon Packard, explaining that he is actually a shield warrior, or at least he used to be. He says that he was recently hit by a status reversal curse cast by an undead commander, which caused all his strength and vitality to be converted into mana. Now he can't even lift his own shield, much less fight as before. Despite having an enormous amount of mana, he doesn't know how to use magic, leaving him practically useless. Ash realizes that his mana level is absurd, almost on par with an archmage, but that doesn't help him in practice. Yuta, on the other hand, starts connecting the dots and suspects that this curse is directly related to the weapon she's searching for, which means it likely fell into the hands of the demonic army. The situation is worse than she imagined. Even so, Banzon Packard says he can't just stand there, since he heard that the undead commander is about to launch an offensive against the humans. He doesn't want to abandon his comrades, even if he feels useless. Ash comments that the so-called status reversal must be the effect of the weapon they are seeking, and Yuta proposes to help, asking if, should he be able to use a shield again, he would help them. He hesitates, saying the battlefield is far too dangerous to bring girls like them, and that even veterans are are being defeated by that commander, but Yuta makes it clear that she also has business to settle with that enemy, and on top of that, she can even provide him with a new shield. After all, she's a blacksmith. Sometime later, they are at a forge near the battlefield. Yuta adjusts the furnace temperature while thinking about everything that has happened, and realizes it's been a while since she last worked in a forge. Even so, she gets excited, enjoying the sound of the hammer and the creation process. The blacksmith who owns the place watches suspiciously, saying he only allowed her to use the furnace because Packard asked, but she looks like a novice who doesn't even know what she's doing. When he notices the absurd temperature of the furnace, he panics, thinking everything is going to explode. As he tries to interfere, he realizes there is no coal, only a monster horn being used as fuel, something completely out of the ordinary. Yuta apologizes for the mess, but tells him to just watch as if it were a show. She begins working with even greater intensity, increasing both the heat and the force of her strikes, explaining that what she's creating is practically a machine with an extremely complex mana formula that requires an absurd level of endurance. That's why the extreme heat is necessary. While working, she asks whether Packard is right or left-handed, and learns that he is right-handed and used to wield a Spartan-style gladius. With that in mind, she defines the materials and the weapon's form, using dragon bone for the blade and embedding the mana formula into the hilt. The blacksmith watches in awe, unable to understand who that girl is, since he has never seen anyone use materials and methods like that. When Yuta starts inscribing runes onto the blade with a special pen, he recalls stories about a heroine connected to a technique that imitated a goddess's forging, something he believed had disappeared long ago. Meanwhile, Packard grows thoughtful, wishing he could return to protecting his comrades. He sees it as his duty and honor, and even without knowing whether this is fate or coincidence, he decides to trust Yuta. He just wants to be able to lift a shield again and protect those who matter to him. After a great deal of effort, Yuta finally finishes the gladius. She explains that the weapon was not made in her original forge and won't last long enough to receive a true name, but even so, it will fulfill her master's wish. She calls the weapon conversion and makes it clear that it is only an alternative solution, asking whether, even so, he can still consider himself a warrior with pride. Packard replies that strictly following the concept of a warrior is something only fools do, and that as long as he can protect his comrades, the method doesn't matter. For him, that is enough. Yuta agrees and says he is worthy of wielding that weapon, asking if he is ready to return to the battlefield. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Packard's comrades struggle to resist the creatures as best they can, but the situation changes completely when the undead commander appears and launches a magical meteor toward one of the group's mages. With no way to dodge, she realizes she won't be able to escape, and in that moment, can only think that everything would be different if Packard were there. At the last moment, Packard appears on the battlefield, raising his massive shield and blocking the magical comet heading toward the group. Even arriving a bit late, he makes it clear that he is still fulfilling his duty, reintroducing himself as the frontline captain and asking the guild leader for new orders. The group's mage is surprised to see he has returned, and he simply apologizes for the delay, saying he ran into some issues along the way. Meanwhile, Yuta comments that introductions can wait because there are bigger problems, and he agrees, heading straight back to the front line. Now in combat, Packard defends with his shield while using the magical gladius, striking the ground and releasing bursts of power. Yuta observes and understands how the weapon works, realizing that although the sword itself isn't particularly efficient, its true potential comes from the absurd amount of mana he now possesses, allowing him to generate pure brute force with each attack. The other warriors are encouraged by the captain's return and begin reorganizing the front line, but the situation worsens when more demons appear, firing flaming arrows. He manages to block the attacks, keeping everyone protected. During the fight, Yuta tries to gather information and asks if anyone has seen someone using a strange staff, but the demons don't cooperate. Ash charges at the enemies with her sword, leaving the archers to Yuta, who uses Elson's eye to fire multiple beams at them. Even so, one of the demons withstands the attack and mocks it. In the middle of the battle, Packard steps in front of Ash to block a strike, creating an opening for her to continue fighting. In a moment of distraction, Ash feigns an opening, and the real attack comes from Yuta, who appears and crushes the demon's head with a hammer strike, taunting him as she does. Soon after, a new presence appears on the battlefield, showing interest in the fight. The figure uses her own blood in her weapon, and Yuta immediately recognizes the mana signature, realizing it is the staff she has been searching for. The demonic commander then launches a blast of status reversal toward them. Ash tries to block it but can't react in time, and the explosion hits both of them. Packard panics, but the commander explains that the attack doesn't kill, it only reverses attributes, just as it did to him before. She then questions how he is still able to fight and raise a shield even after being affected by that power. He replies that even without strength, he will continue fighting to protect others, and takes the opportunity to question why a mage is fighting on the front lines. The commander reveals her contempt for warriors, saying that all that talk about honor is false, because at the most critical moment, they abandon others. She explains that she herself was once left behind by one of those warriors in the chaos of a battle against the Demon King's army, and nearly died. It was then that she found the staff and gained enough power to change her fate, even being acknowledged by the Demon King himself. Now on the demon's side, she believes that power is the only thing that matters, since it's what ensures no one will abandon her again. again. Banzan Packard says he understands her pain, but doesn't agree with her view. He explains that many frontline warriors are mentally shaken by the horrors of war, living on the edge of sanity, yet they still fight believing their comrades will be there for them. To him, true warriors are not as she describes. The commander fires back, saying that maybe she never had those kinds of comrades to begin with. She constantly relives the day she was abandoned, carrying that trauma as fuel for her vengeance, determined to eliminate that warrior and anyone who stands by him. To her, adventurers are nothing but hypocrites. She then recalls her past, explaining that she grew up in chaos, surrounded by death and destruction, not even knowing exactly who she had lost. Trying to survive, she eventually found a basic grimoire and discovered a natural talent for magic. She joined the Adventurers Guild simply to make a living, but ended up being sent to the worst possible place, the front lines against the demons. There, death was constant, with battles happening every day and names being crossed off the guild's list all the time. Even so, it was in that place that she found people she could call comrades. A completely unlikely group, made up of a monk, a draconic archer hiding his origin, an assassin, a fugitive warrior, and her, a homeless mage. Even as misfits, they fought together and supported one another, functioning like a true family. In battle, each of them had a role, and she received constant support to use her magic decisively. Everything worked perfectly, until the day she fell in battle, wounded and unable to continue. With her senses failing, she couldn't even properly hear what her companion was saying. She only saw him turn his back and walk away, leaving her to die. From that moment on, that memory became a deep scar, fueling her desire for revenge. Now, facing a warrior once again, she provokes him, asking if he can still remain standing. Banzan Packard questions whether she truly believes those monsters are her comrades, making it clear that in the demonic army, she is nothing more than a pawn, not even seen as a real person. Even so, Eugene replies that it doesn't matter, because in her view, they are still better than humans, especially adventurers, who first earn your trust and then betray you. To her, monsters are more honest, since they never hide what they are, and if she had the chance, she would kill all humans at once, even selling her own soul to the Demon King. Without hesitation, she unleashes a powerful spell toward Banzan Packard, who knows he won't be able to endure for long, even with his shield. At that moment, he remembers what Yuta said about his blood being necessary to activate the weapon's true power, but he also notices that Eugene is using souls absorbed from the battlefield, which seem to suffer in her hands. He thinks that if he hadn't met Yuta to regain his power, perhaps his own group would have met the same fate, trapped as lost souls. Even so, he cannot bring himself to hate Eugene, because he understands that she was once like them, someone who trusted her group and was betrayed. That's when Banzan Packard decides to show what it truly means to protect one's comrades, recalling the bonds formed on the front lines and the families that are born there even amid war. Using his own blood, he activates the shield's power and reflects all the magic back at Eugene, but she claims that at his level of power, he will never be able to defeat her. When Banzan Packard's group advances, she begins to see her former allies as if they were inside her mind, questioning why they are still there until the very end. A massive explosion occurs due to the reflected magic, and Banzan Packard approaches, suggesting that she lowered her guard because of her former comrades. Eugene denies it, saying she simply couldn't block the attack, but he insists that it's not too late for her to return, that her family is still waiting. This only angers Eugene, who says all warriors say the same thing, and that he's making the same expression as someone from her past that she hates. At that moment, the demons attack without caring if they hit Eugene as well, but Banzan Packard blocks everything. Confronting them, he calls them disgusting for attacking their own comrade, but the demons make it clear she was never an ally, just a useful human. Eugene, irritated, says she doesn't need to be protected and doesn't want to be saved out of pity, but Banzan Packard replies that the decision is his, and that anyone behind his shield becomes his comrade. Suddenly, however, the runes on his equipment fade, and he loses the ability to convert mana into strength. Eugene realizes he has used up all his energy and that his weapon is broken, meaning he can no longer fight on the front lines. A demon then claims that all of this is pointless, that weak humans will die right there, but at that instant, Yuta appears, suggesting that maybe they could turn the demon into a weapon as well, before striking a devastating blow to its head with her hammer. As she clears the battlefield, defeating other enemies, Yuta comments that she could either make use of the demon's body, or simply crush it into dust. At the same time, Ash observes that this group is very different from what she knew before, and praises Banzan Packard, saying he takes his role very seriously. She tells him he can lower his shield now, since reinforcements have arrived, but he still worries and apologizes for not having done more. Shortly after, the guild master approaches, recognizing his effort in managing to block the attack of an entire legion, but Banzan Packard insists it wasn't all his doing, since Eugene hesitated at the final moment. Yuta then explains that weapons like these change according to the wielder's heart, reinforcing just how terrifying war truly is. At that moment, Eugene's true companions appear, and she, already exhausted, asks them to finish her off. Even so, they act as they always did, casually arguing among themselves, which only irritates her further. She accuses the group's leader of abandoning her, but then learns that he never returned because he died protecting her, facing hundreds of the Demon King's soldiers alone to ensure her survival. Hearing this, she begins to understand the truth, while her former allies make it clear that they don't blame her, as she was corrupted by the weapon's power, and that in the end, she is still part of the family. Meanwhile, Yuta continues eliminating lesser demons and starts to think that the Empire might be able to act now, since the battlefield is clearer. But something strange happens. An unusual silence takes over the area. Suddenly, a demon appears, saying he has just awakened and already finds a commander defeated. He introduces himself as Thoth, a centurion of the 3rd Legion, seeking a worthy fight. He charges at Yuta with extremely fast, lightning-wreathed attacks, demanding an honorable duel. Yuta realizes the problem. He has appeared at the worst possible moment, and notices that Ash is also at her limit. Even so, she decides to act, remembering that one cannot create a good weapon without understanding the heart of the one who will wield it. Gathering everything she has left, Yuta unleashes an extremely powerful strike, the nail hammer blow, concentrating all her strength into a single point and tearing the demon's head off. The attack works, but it comes at a heavy cost, draining her strength and forcing her to her knees, unable even to lift her hammer. In his final moments, the demon recognizes who she is, the blacksmith who once worked with the demonic army, and calls her a traitor. Even without a head, the demon's body still moves, preparing one last attack with all its remaining energy. Yuta has no strength left to dodge, and even Banzon-Packard cannot get up to defend her. Then, at the last second, Eugene grabs her staff and teleports to the front line, determined to use the monstrous weapon one more time, offering everything, her blood, her soul, everything she has, asking it to answer her call. Yuta realizes how dangerous that is, that Eugene is pushing the weapon beyond its limits, while her companions beg her to stop. But for the first time, she seems at peace. A massive magical explosion completely destroys what remained of the demon, and shortly after, Eugene finds herself in an empty space, alone, believing that this is the end she deserves. But to her surprise, her former comrade appears, calling out to her as always, saying she arrived too early, as if it's not yet her time to leave. Eugene asks if he was waiting for her there, and the veteran replies that of course he was. After all, if any demon followed her into the afterlife, someone would need to protect a weakling like her. Even so, she argues that she has become strong too, and he agrees casually, saying he probably didn't need to worry, since she's still as grumpy as ever. Still, Eugene admits that she has committed many sins, and he replies that what matters is that she recognizes it, because even considering all the lives she took, he saved even more people, so he can help her find redemption. He suggests that this way, they won't be separated anymore, adding that he missed her, even asking if she can now handle drinking or if she's still weak. Walking beside him toward the afterlife, Eugene simply thanks her veteran, finally bringing that chapter to a close. Later, Yuta gathers the fragments of the staff and realizes it is completely destroyed, beyond any chance of use. Meanwhile, an exhausted Banzon-Packard removes his armor because it has become too heavy, and holding Eugene's hand, offers a prayer in respect for her soul, acknowledging that she made her choice, and saying he respects it. Ash looks at the state of the weapon and asks if it's broken, and Yuta replies that it would take years to repair, so it's not even worth trying. The conversation turns more reflective, with Ash commenting on how justice and convictions are complicated, and Yuta admits she doesn't fully understand either. She simply follows the example of her master, who was abandoned by the Empire in a field of annihilation, and was saved by a heroine with no ulterior motive, acting purely out of the desire to save. This makes Ash realize how difficult it is to reach that ideal of justice. Sometime later, Banzon-Packard travels with Yuta and Ash toward the blacksmith street, and Yuta casually comments on how amazing the place must be. Ash, however, worries about whether he's really okay with leaving his group behind, but he assures her that he is, explaining that he had a good talk with them and understands his situation. His master even regretted it, saying she thought he had come back for good, but he makes it clear that, in his current state, he can no longer fight as before, so he intends to forge his own weapon, adapted to his abilities, and then return to the front lines. He believes that, with Yuta's help, he can achieve that, and promises that one day he will return to his role as a shield bearer. She replies that she'll be waiting, and he assures her he won't disappoint her. Back in the present, he tells Ash that it's not time yet, but that he will return. Yuta then welcomes him and introduces the place where she is staying, the Half-Life Forge, explaining that she is there as an apprentice. Ash jokes that, in reality, she doesn't work at the forge at all. She just keeps an eye on Yuta to prevent trouble. Banzon-Packard finds it strange not to see any of her special weapons around, and Ash explains that monstrous weapons are taboo in that place, especially because of Yuta herself. But before the conversation can continue, Yuta finds a box with her belongings, and realizes something is wrong. At that moment, Baron Brook appears, asking her to leave, saying he doesn't want to do this, but she needs to leave the forge. Ash questions the reason, and Baron Brook explains that he has already made his decision. He cannot live with someone as unstable as her. Yuta suspects it has something to do with the council, but he denies it, saying the decision is his, and once again asks her to leave. Disappointed, Yuta accepts, saying she didn't expect him to give up on them like that, but she understands, after all, she really did bring a lot of trouble. As she walks away, Baron Brook thinks that this is also for her own good, since the forge is under the control of the Council of Elders, which limits her talent. On top of that, the Empire has started to move. If they discover that she is a survivor of Volcania, she will likely be forced to work for the capital, and the power of the monstrous weapons will come to light. He knows that the people around her would try to protect her, but he still prefers that she follow her own path, free to continue forging. Outside, Yuta shows concern, because even after being expelled, she still has a contract with the council to recover weapons, and now realizes that the users of these weapons are far stronger than she imagined. The problem is that without a forge, she cannot craft or earn money. That's when Banzan Packard suggests something simple: buy a forge, and tosses a bag full of gold in front of her. Ash is surprised by the amount of money, and he explains that it represents lives on the front lines, and that thanks to the two of them, he was able to protect his family and his comrades, so he is simply repaying them. Yuta feels a bit awkward, but he insists that they gave him something no amount of money could buy, and he believes her skills can give hope to many people, just like they did for him. He makes it clear that it's not an obligation. He's doing it because he wants to. Ash is moved by this, but Yuta breaks the mood by asking if the money comes with no repayment, making Ash call her crazy. Even so, later on, already at a real estate office on Blacksmith Street, Yuta asks for the most expensive place, while Ash reminds her that the money isn't even hers, and Banzan Packard simply agrees, and tells them to go ahead. Suddenly, however, a hooded man appears with an extremely powerful gauntlet, activates the weapon, and blinds the entire group, disappearing in seconds along with the bag of money. Ash realizes that wasn't normal, since even she couldn't react, and Yuta concludes that there is a monstrous weapon within Blacksmith Street itself, and that recovering this item has now become their job. Banzan Packard comments that it's probably a weapon made by Yuta herself, and that her life is never peaceful, while Ash asks if he isn't worried about the money. He replies that such a large sum draws attention, so sooner or later someone will notice. Yuta, however, says it's not that simple, and asks Ash if she knows where to find certain people, mentioning the leader of the pickpockets. Ash confirms that she does, and Yuta asks her to take them there, since they have no other choice. Thus, they head to the underworld of the Craftsman's District, a place hidden behind the surface's shine, filled with scrap and discarded iron, known as Becker's. There, they arrive at the Bleat pawnshop, where Ash knocks on the door impatiently, demanding they open up immediately. After a brief exchange with the guard, the door opens, and Ash remarks that it's time to face her past. Just by descending the stairs into the underground, Banzan Packard can already feel the heavy, bloodthirsty atmosphere. Inside, Risala, the owner of the Bleat house, greets the group by saying they take anything to sell, and if they don't have it, they steal it. Upon seeing Ash, she mocks her, asking if she came crawling back or if she misses the mercenary life. Ash responds dryly that it's been a long time, while Risala comments that she still has that irritating expression. She then orders the mercenaries present to leave, saying that their veteran has arrived, making it clear that Ash's presence still commands respect in that place. Banzan Packard looks at those bloodthirsty mercenaries and gets confused when he hears Ash being called senior, so he asks what that means. Yuta explains simply that Ash used to work as a mercenary before staying with her, and that it's an old story. Without hesitation, Ash steps forward and explains the situation, saying they were hit by a massive flash near the real estate office, and the money disappeared, then directly asks if it was the work of someone connected to Risala. Risala replies that she's accusing the wrong person, saying that if she had someone with that kind of ability, she would have hired them long ago, and makes it clear it wasn't her. In fact, her own business has been suffering because of this so-called Red Flash individual. She says she even has a guess about who it might be, but since the person uses a monstrous weapon, no one can act recklessly. She also takes the opportunity to mock them, saying all of this is happening because some idiot let these weapons slip away, which makes Yuta turn her face aside, clearly bothered. Ash then says she can deal with that person, as long as she knows who it is, and Risala seems interested, asking if the famous Yellow Eyes is going to act again. With nothing to lose, she decides to help, and gives them information about a hideout in an alley around Blacksmith Street, a place made by abandoned children called Shangui. Hearing this, Banzan Packard suggests it might be better to understand the environment first before acting, but Yuta has no patience for that, and says that since it seems like everyone wants to fight, she'll handle it herself in a polite way. As soon as they arrive at the location, she simply breaks down the door and walks in, demanding the money back, threatening to take everyone there down if they don't hand over the thief responsible. The mercenaries are surprised to have been found, but they have no intention of letting the group leave alive. Yuta, without wasting time, sarcastically says she tried to resolve things peacefully, and asks Ash if she can act now. Ash replies that if they just return what they stole, everything ends there, but one of the mercenaries recognizes her, and comments that she's the famous yellow-eyed mercenary, asking if she hadn't retired. Meanwhile, Yuta reinforces that they already know what will happen if they don't cooperate, and since no one responds, the confrontation begins. One of the enemies orders them to block the path and protect the inner room, which raises suspicion in Ash, who decides to advance to check what they are hiding. In the middle of the chaos, Yuta appears beside one of the mercenaries and knocks him down with a direct strike, while Banzan Packard, even without his original strength, fights using magic thanks to the large amount of mana he still possesses. With that opening, Ash pushes through the doors and ends up finding something unexpected: children. It wasn't a normal hideout, they were just lost kids. Realizing this, the tension shifts completely, and one of the men, with a scar on his face, begins to explain the situation. He says the Empire lives in constant war, leaving behind a trail of destruction destruction and abandonment, which creates a huge number of orphans. Without identity or a future, these children end up living in alleys, surviving however they can. Over time, some of them grew up and formed the Shangui Group, a brotherhood created to protect these children and teach them how to survive in that cruel world. The problem is that, as the group grew, other factions in the alleys began to see them as a threat. Because they were mostly made up of children, they became targets, and a war broke out. The former leader died trying to protect everyone, and that's when the current leader found that strange glove with powers. Thanks to this monstrous weapon, they've managed to survive until now. Even after hearing all this, Yuta isn't convinced, and says it sounds like a made-up story, asking about the money again. But this time, Ash makes a different decision and says she will help them, explaining that just because they live in the alleys doesn't mean they have to remain in the darkness forever, and that they can build a better place to live. Yuta finds this attitude strange, not understanding why Ash is so involved. But before the situation can escalate, someone returns to the hideout and is shocked by what's happening. The vice leader tries to calm things down, asking for respect first, and for everyone to listen to what they have to say, suggesting that something even bigger may be behind all of this. Meanwhile, the group's leader managed to hold off the enemies, taking advantage of the monstrous weapon, a gauntlet that blinded anyone who got too close. After taking down yet another opponent with her knife, she was still completely surrounded, making it clear that she wouldn't let anyone lay a hand on Shangui's children. On the other side, there was a temporary alliance between alley craftsmen, the black market, traffickers, and mercenaries. One of them remarked that she was holding out longer than expected. Another added that, in truth, she had already lived longer than she should have, considering what she was. At that moment, the big brute she had just stabbed simply stood back up, saying it was nothing before knocking her down with a heavy punch. A legitimate merchant mocked her, saying he expected more from orphans who survived the empire, and that if the leader was worthless, then the rest were too. He ordered her to hand over the strange weapon in exchange for her life, even assuring her they wouldn't kill the children, since they intended to sell them as imperial slaves on the artisan street. Meanwhile, the brute took the opportunity to steal her money, surprised by how much he found. The Shangui leader, already out of strength, felt her body no longer responding, and realized she couldn't let those children fall into their hands. The apparent leader of the group added that they would take the weapon after finishing off the rest of Shangui, dividing the children equally, while another commented on how impossible it was to imagine a normal life living in the alleys. She remembered everything she had been through in that place, being enslaved, ridiculed, and rejected when she tried to find honest work, simply for being an orphan of the empire, someone who grew up belonging nowhere. Even so, together with the family she had built, they managed to find happiness, chasing the dream of a normal life. It had finally seemed like they found a place to belong, until all of this happened. In that moment, she realized she could no longer keep up with her children, and understood that this was her limit. Just as the brute prepared to end it all, Ash appeared and tore him apart in seconds. Ash asked if she was the leader of the children, while the chief could barely believe what had just happened. Then Ash commented that she had lost too much blood because of the weapon and didn't even know how to use it properly. Snatching the gauntlet from her hand without ceremony, she made it clear that the priority now was recovering the stolen money, and that those men would pay with interest. The rest of Shangui arrived to rescue their leader, who, still confused, asked who those people defeating the enemies were. The vice leader explained that they were veterans. One of the mercenaries doubted that just 3 of them could handle everyone, but Banzan Packard easily dodged his attack, saying his swordsmanship was pathetic, and confidently replied that 3 were more than enough. Right after, he launched a magical missile that struck the mercenary head-on, sending him flying. Ash then advanced with the gauntlet, while the mercenary still believed she wouldn't do anything without a real weapon. But mid-air, she activated the true power of the monstrous weapon, and all the enemy's weapons were ripped away from them, spinning around her like a magnetic aura. With that, Ash declared she now had everything she needed, and in the next instant, she began cutting down the disarmed mercenaries as they tried to reclaim their weapons. The Shangui leader could only think about how everything was happening too fast for her eyes, unable to believe someone that strong existed on the artisan street. She wondered if that was the true power of the weapon she had failed to use. One of the mercenaries recognized Ash and the yellow-eyed girl, questioning the reason for the attack and saying they should be allies, accusing them of disrespecting the rules of the place. Yuta replied that she had never heard of such rules, and made it clear that the moment they touched her money, the only possible outcome was death. The mercenary tried to justify himself, saying he had only been hired, but was still struck down by a long-range hammer blow. One of the elves involved asked why they were doing this to them, and Ash bluntly replied that she hated people like them. She explained that whenever a child with potential appeared, they dragged them into that world, stained their hands with blood, sold them to the empire, and made them believe they could never escape, as if there were no hope. To her, those children didn't belong in the alleys. They were no different from anyone else, and deserved to chase their own dreams. Right after, she used the technique of 1,000 flaming arms. Seeing that, the current Shangui leader remembered the former chief and his words about dreams and paths, beginning to wonder if people like them could ever reach something like that. She told the vice leader that she still remembered him, and he replied that she resembled the former chief, bringing back the same feeling they had when they first met her. He recalled that when they invaded their hideout, they weren't just angry about the money, they realized those children were victims too. The former chief always said they were far too brave for their age and should live like normal children, chasing their dreams. The vice affirmed he still believed believed in those words, asking if she couldn't see that they could be free one day. She replied that the former chief died protecting those dreams and failed to protect everyone, apologizing as she lowered her head. Even so, she decided that from that moment on, she would truly protect them, protecting their family and their dreams with her life. Thinking of everything the former chief had done for them, and how they failed to protect him in the end, she gathered her strength and ordered Shangui to move, saying it was time to chase their dreams and achieve freedom. At the same time, she faced Yuta, wielding a massive hammer, while one of the mercenaries watched in shock, commenting that the weapon seemed even more powerful than the other strange one. Yuta found the remark about the weapon being strange odd, and reacted provocatively, as if they had insulted something important to her. Right after, she delivered a blow so powerful it knocked down several enemies at once, cracking the ground. The alliance leader, unable to understand the situation, questioned what was happening, since it was only 3 people facing everyone, but it was clear those 3 were far from ordinary. Meanwhile, Ash skillfully dodged the attacks, but she realized the enemies were more experienced than she had expected, and that the longer the fight dragged on, the worse it would be for them. In a brief moment of carelessness, she was almost hit, but the Shangui vice leader appeared just in time and blocked the strike with his sword, making it clear that no one should attack that veteran. He immediately counterattacked, taking down the mercenary and declaring that they would now fight to protect everyone there as well. From that point on, the clash turned into an all-out battle, with the alliance facing Shangui alongside the 3 strongest fighters. The alliance leader stayed further back, visibly nervous, until Banzan Packard bound his feet with mana chains, preventing any chance of escape. One of the elven mercenaries realized the situation had completely changed and concluded that, with Yuta involved, it was no longer worth continuing the fight. Desperate, the leader ordered them to free him, but the elf simply told him to do whatever he wanted, because the alliance was already finished. Other mercenaries also refused to help, saying they wouldn't sacrifice themselves, and even his direct subordinates backed off, claiming they couldn't die there. In the end, he was completely abandoned. Seeing that, Ash commented that a group built on fear creates neither bonds nor respect, and that at that point, those children were far better than them. She then ordered them to beat the leader, but not kill him, and later the Shangui members truly beat him mercilessly. After a while, Yuta decided that was enough and told them to stop, explaining that the artisan street and the alleys had a complicated relationship, and that killing everyone would only bring more trouble. Since they had already recovered the weapon and the money, that was enough. Banzan Packard then asked what they would do with the other survivors, but at that moment, the Shangui leader and vice leader declared that they would serve Yuta from then on. She refused immediately, saying it made no sense for them to serve her, especially since she wouldn't even have the money to support everyone. Even so, she made it clear that if anyone touched her money again, there would be no forgiveness. On the other hand, she offered to teach the basics of blacksmithing to anyone who wanted to learn, encouraging everyone to follow their own paths. Before leaving, she told everyone to clear out. Ash commented that they would be able to move forward, and the Shangui leader agreed with the vice that it was time to do things their own way. 4 days later, Yuta was already overseeing the construction of her new base, located right on the border between the Artisans District and the alleys, an idea suggested by Ash herself. For Yuta, it didn't really matter, as long as she could work peacefully with her equipment. Even with the base organized, there was still the issue of tracking the weapons, since Elson alone couldn't locate all of them, only marking positions when they were activated. At least now they had a fixed point to move between areas, even if it was somewhat troublesome. Yuta even mentioned that the presence of Shangui's children could help, since extra hands are always useful. Banzan Packard questioned whether they could keep everyone under control, and she replied that Ash would handle it. Even so, he reminded her that the region was practically a lawless zone, with illegal activities being ignored by the Imperial Knights, who pretended not to see certain things. Yuta, on the other hand, made it clear she didn't care, saying that if anyone showed up to cause trouble, she would deal with it by force. Banzan Packard didn't like the idea much, but let it go. Later that night, a group of hooded thieves decided to break into the still under construction forge, thinking it would be easy to steal from a new place, probably owned by an apprentice. They began grabbing weapons and supplies, and one of the rookies, holding a sword, reflected that he had never made decisions on his own, and that his life had led him to that point, helping with thefts. Suddenly, guards appeared and caught them in the act. The leader of the thieves realized they would be captured and, without hesitation, used a stolen spear to strike the rookie's legs, leaving him behind as bait while he fled. One of the guards was outraged, questioning how they dared to steal from Big Sis, while another stated that they had chosen the wrong place to attack. The next morning, the boy was already tied to a post, being publicly judged, while people commented that the Imperial Knights did whatever they wanted, but that criminals also had to pay. They said that this so-called Big Sis had worked hard to earn that forge. The boy, unresponsive, could only think that he was always dragged into situations like that, without even having time to regret anything, accepting that such an end seemed inevitable for someone like him. The guard who captured him drew the stolen sword and threatened to cut off one of his arms, but before he could act, someone in the crowd mentioned the old habits of the alleys. Another confirmed that they had tampered with Big Sis's weapons and asked if she was really Yuta. She appeared, confirming it impatiently, and ordered them to bring the boy to her, saying she had an idea, since the weapon was hers, and dealing with thieves was also her responsibility. Later, at the forge, the Shangui leader was furious upon hearing about the theft, wanting to beat the boy but realized Yuta wasn't even there. The vice explained that she had taken the thief outside, adding that it was hard to understand what went on in her head. Outside, Yuta explained to the boy that she had saved him from losing an arm and that now he could repay her by helping with work. Confused, he asked what kind of work it would be, and she replied that he would find out soon. She also made it clear that if he gave up halfway because it was too hard, he just had to say so, because then she would personally rip off his arm. He realized he had never had a choice from the beginning, and she replied that she was still being kind by even considering his feelings. Shortly after, they were already inside a dungeon near the blacksmith street, where the boy faced a monster, surprised that this kind of work came from a blacksmith. As he dodged the attacks of a chameleon-like creature, Yuta simply watched and commented that he was doing better than she expected. The boy thought Yuta was completely insane, and that he needed to get out of there as soon as possible. The monster itself wasn't that strong, but its ability to disappear and reappear using invisibility made everything far more dangerous. In just a few seconds, the creature appeared behind him to attack, and he barely managed to dodge, already realizing that at that rate he would end up dying. Watching from a distance, Yuta told him to hold on a little longer, and then threw electric darts that paralyzed the monster, casually commenting that she had actually intended to hit the boy, but unfortunately it didn't work. Even more desperate, he could only think that the woman was insane, and that maybe it would be better to just ask to lose his arm right away. That was when Yuta explained that it was all part of the test for the first creation of the new forge, the Thunderbird dagger, and that the activation had worked perfectly. The knight, in disbelief, wondered why she hadn't just solved everything from the start, instead of putting him through that. Later, a miner thanked Yuta for clearing the area, saying they could now return to work safely. She replied that it was nothing special, just that her assistant had been somewhat useless, while the boy lay on the ground still repeating that she was crazy. The miner then handed over the promised reward, wire stones, and even gave double the agreed amount, asking if she needed them for some kind of monster weapon. Yuta replied that she had other plans, and that she would also take the creature's corpse. Then she tossed the box next to the knight and told him to carry it. On the way back, he wondered how he had ended up in that situation, while Yuta threatened that if he kept up that attitude, she would rip off both his arms. She also made it clear that trying to run away would be useless, because she would chase him to hell if necessary. Honestly, he was starting to think losing one arm would be easier. Even so, they arrived at the forge, and she introduced the place, saying he'd better work properly, because that place would become very famous. Not fully understanding, he asked what he was supposed to do, and Yuta replied that in a forge, the basics were to listen to the sound of fire and metal. Shortly after, he was already hammering a piece while she told him to strike harder. The heat was unbearable, and he complained that it felt like torture, but Yuta explained that beginners don't get tricks or advice for free, and that he should keep working. When he asked if she faced that heat every time she created a weapon, she answered bluntly, asking if he thought weapons simply appeared out of nowhere. As he kept hammering, he began to notice something different. He had always held swords, but had never thought about how they were made, and now he could see the metal changing shape with every strike. For the first time, he was creating something with his own hands, and surprisingly, it was fun. After a while, Yuta noticed the change in his expression, and commented that this was the first condition to becoming a blacksmith, enjoying working with metal. Even so, he asked why she was teaching someone like him, and Yuta replied that it was his eyes that caught her attention. Empty eyes, with no hope or future. She said she had seen many people looting the artisan's district out of greed or anger, but eyes like his, completely devoid of perspective, were different. Then she cooled the blade in water, and said the result had turned out clean, instructing him to mark his own initials on the sword. That weapon, even if simple, had been made by him. He was amazed, saying it was incredible, and began reflecting on his life, realizing he had always been dragged along by others, by his family when he became a knight, and by his companions when he got involved in theft. He had never chosen anything for himself, and now he had something he had created on his own. Yuta then explained the entire process behind a weapon, from adventurers facing dungeons, to miners extracting materials at risk, to the craftsman putting everything into its creation, and that was exactly what he had stolen before. In the end, she said he could leave if he wanted, taking both the stolen sword and the one he made, but pointed out that his eyes were already different, better than before. Later, back in the knight's district, he still carried that strange feeling when a veteran showed up, surprised that he was alive and already talking about a new plan to steal again. The boy refused, saying he had almost died last time, but the veteran ignored him and insisted on the idea, claiming that blacksmiths were easy to fool. As they talked, another knight complained that it was unfair that they risked their lives while craftsmen stayed in hot yet comfortable places. The boy, remembering the unbearable heat of the forge, realized how absurd that was. Even so, the group began the robbery, and the veteran mocked the blacksmiths, saying that the hammer they treated like a relic was just a piece of junk, and that they would take everything of value. At that moment, the young man began to reflect on everything, remembering his father's words, the pressure to become a knight, and how he had always been told he had no choice and would be useless otherwise. Tired of that, he finally made a decision on his own. He drew his sword and cut off the arm of the veteran who was stealing the hammer. The other man was shocked, asking what he was doing, but the boy remained still, reflecting on his choices. For the first time, he realized he had done something of his own will. He remembered Yuta's words, how she said his expression had improved, that there was more hope there, and even her suggestion about trying blacksmithing, saying he could even become number 2, right behind her. The bald man questioned why he had done that to his own companion, companions, thinking he had gone insane after being captured, but the knight thought differently, determined not to live the way his father wanted anymore, without having his own choice. He drew the sword he had forged himself, declaring that from then on he would use it to follow his own future, in his own way, and ordered everyone to get out of the forge where he now worked. The veteran, furious, gathered magic and said that he was the one who had gone insane, threatening to kill him right there while they looted everything. When he launched his magical missiles, the knight managed to deflect several of them using both swords, but was ultimately hit by the final attack and knocked down. Even so, he stood up again and charged forward, attacking rapidly with both blades, breaking through one enemy's defense and throwing a sword straight into the veteran's eye. During the fight, the other bald man kept mocking him, saying he had spirit, but was still trash and would never win as the worst kind of knight. The young man, however, was already realizing he couldn't predict every strike, his body accumulating wounds, understanding that he truly wasn't made for that path. Even so, that sword was different. It was something he had created with his own effort. At the decisive moment, the blade revealed its strength, shattering the enemy's weapon, and taking advantage of the opening, he finished his opponent with a fatal blow. When silence took over the forge, a voice commented that it had been impressive. It was Yuta, appearing as she removed a cloak that kept her invisible, made from the body of the chameleon monster they had defeated together. She asked if he was already starting to consider that place his home, calling him her disciple, though in a somewhat teasing tone. The novice, surprised, asked if that ability was the same as the monsters, and how she was able to use it. Yuta replied simply that she creates weapons from monsters, but said that wasn't the most important thing at that moment. What truly mattered was the fact that he had just killed 2 knights, which meant he could no longer return to the Empire and would be forced to hide there in the forge. Then Yuta properly introduced herself, saying she was the monstrous blacksmith, responsible for the weapons that had become taboo in that place, and the only one capable of creating them. She stated that she would teach him everything, welcoming him to the blacksmith's street. Meanwhile, she was already thinking that now that she had a disciple, it might be time to pay a visit to her older sister.